Our second theory of deviance is known as structural strain, sometimes known as anomie theory. My caption for this one is big dreams, little means. Some people want it all. They have these lofty goals, a lot of things they want to do or have, but they just don't have the means to achieve it. They don't have a way to get it. So that's what lies at the basis of structural strain, but I'll go into more detail about that. This theory takes into account two elements of social structure. The first is the goals that a particular culture or subculture defines as valuable. The second part is the culturally legitimate means to achieve those goals. So really this theory is looking at what are the goals that we learn, through the socialization process? What are the goals that we learn are valuable within the culture we are raised into, or the subculture that we, you know, have a lot of access to or grow up in? Like, what is important to us? Like, what are the goals that we should be pursuing? And then what are the means that we have to attain or achieve those goals? Structural strain, you see the definition there, it's an imbalance between the culturally valued goals and the legitimate means of achieving those goals. So structural strain happens. Structural strain is said to exist when an individual or a group does not have the legitimate means to achieve the goals that their culture or subculture has defined as valuable. So we could say that structural strain, might occur when we do not have access to the type of job that we really want, or the type of maybe house or neighborhood that we really want. But structural strain can occur in much more routine, more maybe personalized or even subjective ways. Maybe you really seek the attention of your crush, right? Uh, you've come to, believe that attention from the opposite sex or being, quote unquote, ladies' man, or get it, winning the affections of, you know, other people are important. You've come to see that as a valued goal within your culture or subculture, but you really, really like one person, but you can't get their attention, at least through legitimate means. Well, people might resort to deviance in such a case. People might resort to maybe non-legitimate, more abnormal, hence more deviant ways to get someone's attention, right? What are the culturally legitimate means to get the attention of someone who, say, we have a crush on, somebody who we want to like us? Well, we could be nice to them, maybe take an interest in the things that, he or she appears to be interested in, try to support them through difficult times if, we have that opportunity. Those would probably be the legitimate means to do that. But if we're doing those things and, we're not succeeding in getting this person's attention, we might, under structural strain theory, resort to more deviant means. Maybe we try to get their attention by not being nice to them, but being mean to them. Try to get their attention by, calling attention to maybe things that they do that they're not proud of. Get their attention by making, undesirable, unwanted, physical contact with them. So we experience this structural strain, this lack of congruence between what we want and what we have to make it happen. When structural strain occurs, that is, according to this theory, when deviance is likely to happen. Maybe I have, as a result of my culture, I've come to really want to get admitted to a particular college or university. Maybe I have elder family members who have really impressed upon me the importance of going to this particular college or university. So I've come to accept it as valuable. Well, what are the legitimate means that I have to get into that college or university? Well, I'm probably going to want to, make sure that I've done or make sure that I have certain things, right? If I'm trying to get into a really selective college or university, I want to have, good grades. I want to have a high GPA. I want to have impressive standardized test scores, so maybe high SAT. I probably want to demonstrate community service, or a willingness to help out others, some leadership opportunities, or at least showing leadership potential. That would be great. But maybe I don't have those things, right? I might be in my junior year of high school and my GPA isn't so great. Or, I've never done well on standardized tests. Yeah, I doubt that I'll be able to do well on the SAT. Volunteering in my community or joining certain organizations, maybe even starting an organization, all of those things might be not very appealing to me, right? I'd rather watch sports or I'd rather, hang out with my friends. So yeah, that doing the legitimate means to get into that college or university, might not be available to me. Maybe that ship has sailed, so to speak. It might be a little too little, a little too late. Under structural strain theory, me really wanting this valued goal, but not having access to, or at least no longer having access to, the legitimate means to make that happen, I would be likely to buck the rules a little bit. I would be likely to engage in acts of deviance. Maybe I try to find a way to cheat on the SAT. Maybe I become more likely to, uh, you know, cheat on my exams. Maybe I see, maybe, maybe when I'm putting together my resume and writing my personal statement for college admission, maybe I say I've done things that I haven't really done, right? Maybe I say I was a member of some organization that I didn't really belong to, right? Maybe I say I started an organization to help some disadvantaged group in my community that I didn't really start. So wanting to get into this college or university, but not having or no longer having the legitimate means to achieve that, well, I'm experiencing structural strain, so I become willing to engage in certain acts of deviance. When we look at that definition of structural strain, we see an imbalance between, the culturally valued goals and the legitimate means of achieving those goals. It could be interpreted to, I think we could interpret that to say that, well, marginalized people or low income people, people who maybe historically don't have access to, you know, well-paying jobs or don't, have much access to higher education, don't have access to, quality housing or healthcare, might be the most likely to experience structural strain and thus act deviantly. And yeah, that's logical. I could understand where people would think that. But one thing we have to keep in mind when it comes to structural strain theory is the internalization of those goals that our culture or subculture defines as valuable. In order to experience structural strain, individuals or groups or communities, whoever is experiencing that structural strain, needs to come to accept that goal as valuable. To go back to the example that I uh, just went through, I might have members of my family who really impress upon me the importance of getting into and attending a certain college or university, but maybe I just don't internalize that. I might decide that getting into that college or university isn't that important to me. Maybe I say, well, I'll do what I can, but, if I'm not able to get into that university, there are several other colleges or universities, and I'll find the one that's right for me. Or, maybe I come to say, well, maybe that university worked out great for, my grandfather or my mom, my dad, whoever. Maybe that was for them, but it's not necessarily for me. In that case, if attending this particular highly selective university that my grandparents or parents really want me to, if I determine that it's not that important to me, it's not all that valuable to me, well, then I'm less likely to experience structural strain. Okay. We also call this theory anomie theory because when structural strain takes place, well, the rules, the norms, the standards that used to be really important to us, the things that used to really drive or motivate or kind of command our behavior, well, they lose their influence. You know, if we really want something but we're not able to get it, we might, what do I do now? You know, yeah, I've been pursuing this goal, but you know, I you know, it's clear I'm no longer going to be able to achieve it. What do I do now? My daily routine might change. My goals for the future, my outlook of myself might change. So anime, this, questioning the norms, the rules, standards, anime can set in when structural strain occurs. People might start to feel that, the system is rigged. The system doesn't work for people like me. I might need to do things my own way. Let's now talk about the different responses to structural strain. One person might say, well, I need to do things my own way. That's one response. Other people might respond very differently. So let's talk about some of these responses here. Conformity is when someone accepts the valued goals of their culture or subculture and accepts the legitimate means of achieving them. Conformists are, not likely to be deviant. Conformists follow along with norms. Innovators, on the other hand, much, much more likely to engage in acts of deviance. They accept the valued goals, however, they reject the legitimate means of achieving those. I'm going to do things my own way. Why join extracurricular activities when I can just say I was in extracurricular activities? Why go to college and try to get a high-paying job when I could maybe try to make that money that I want to make via illegal activity? So innovators reject legitimate means of achieving goals. They try to go about, they still have those goals. They have, they want the nice job, they want money, they want status, but they, you know, decide they are not going to utilize those legitimate means. Ritualists, these are people who respond to structural strain by rejecting the valued goals, but yet they still adhere to the means to achieve those goals. Okay, that they go along. Just they might not know what else to do, right? Well, I don't need a high-paying job, but I'm still going to go to school, right? 'Cause, they're afraid of how they might be judged, or they might be afraid of doing things their own way. So ritualists follow the beaten path, so to speak. The value goals aren't that important to them, but they're still going to adhere to the means to achieving those goals. Retreatists, these are individuals who reject both the valued goals and the legitimate means to achieve them. They decide, you know what, these goals aren't that important to me, so therefore the means to achieving them aren't important to me. I knew someone in graduate school, he was, en route to a PhD, but decided while in graduate school, you know what, this isn't that important to me anymore. I no longer need to be, doesn't make sense for me to take these classes, write these papers, conduct this research, take my general exam, write my dissertation. If I don't want the PhD, I don't need to do these things anymore. So they're called retreatists because they step back. They step back from pursuing these valued goals. Lastly, rebels, these reject both the valued goals and the legitimate means to achieving these goals. They replace new goals with their own, they replace they come up with new goals entirely on their own, and they come up with new means to achieve those goals. Now, can someone come up with new goals and new means? I don't know. I have doubts about that. That kind of flies in the face of what we know about the power of agents of socialization. Anything that we aspire to be or anything that we want to do, well, we're clearly getting, we're probably being influenced by someone or something else. Even if we know what we don't want to do, we're probably, via our reference groups and our agents of socialization, we're probably introduced to what we don't want to be. So, can someone truly be a rebel? That gets a little philosophical. I personally have my doubts as to whether someone can reject the means to achieve something and then uh, come up with their own goals and means to achieve that. There's debates about that. Uh, but yeah, a rebel in theory is someone who responds to structural strain by rejecting those valued goals and coming up with their own goals and means to achieve them.